Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Cheryl and I'm an adult services librarian at the Westland Public Library. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. We have more upcoming programs at the library and I'll put a link in the chat so you can see what those are. For the presentation, please keep yourselves muted and your video off. And you can put your questions in the chat at any time and we'll get to those during the Q&A at the end. Tonight, we have Introduction to Green Burial in Oregon. Elizabeth Fournier is the owner and operator of Cornerstone Funeral Services in Boring, Oregon, the first green funeral home in the Portland metropolitan area, and she serves on the advisory board for the Green Burial Council. Her book, The Green Burial Guidebook, Everything You Need to Plan an Affordable, Environmentally Friendly Burial, was published in 2018 and is available to check out at the library. She spoke at TEDx Salem in 2019 in a talk titled Going Green, Your Last Heroic Act of Volunteerism. Please welcome Elizabeth Fournier.
All right, hello. Hope you are all comfortable and cozy and enjoying this over the interwebs. I like talking in person and seeing people and sitting in a group and sharing, but this is what we got and that is okay. So I'm going to get rid of my screen. No reason to look at me when I have all these fabulous photos that I'll be sharing with you. So let me just scoopity scoop, get rid of me. All right, so I'm going to talk for, we'll see how long it takes, 40, 45, maybe 30, just kind of whatever it goes. And then I'd love to answer all and any questions that you have, because ultimately that's why you're here, right? You've got questions about what the heck this green thing is in the zeitgeist that we talk about, this green burial. So ultimately, you know, green burial, it's saving the planet one death at a time. It's what the world needs now. It's how to reduce our carbon footprint and go out in this wonderful eco-friendly style. So take a peek at this. This is what a green burial looks like. We have a natural looking container with some natural organic flowers. We have it in a setting which looks pretty darn natural, and it will be going down into a grave which doesn't have a concrete liner or a cement box, and the body is not full of any sort of embalming chemicals. It's all natural. So that's our whole thing. Natural, green, simultaneous words, and that's what we're talking about with this. It's really that idea of caring about the body just with the least possible environmental impacts, that body preparations that allow the body to decompose naturally in a specific site, which is set aside for this type of environmentally sound resting at peace. And there's tons of these all over Oregon. And we're going to discover that and talk about that. And there's a lot actually all over the United States. So this isn't something that is just what we do in Clackamas County or what can be done in Oregon. This can be done all over the lower 50. It's something that we do. So again, green burial, right? Don't fill the body with embalming chemicals. Don't place it in a grave with a vault or a non-biodegradable object. And then of course we want a casket which can replenish the soil, because the end goal is to go ahead and help and give back. Your ultimate big green giving back is giving your body to the earth. So I was blessed with my love for green burial 16 years ago. And there is this wonderful, gentle community that asked me to meet them at the local pub and discuss a plan to lay their loved one to rest. So I happen to own and operate Cornerstone Funeral Services. I'm in Boring, Oregon, and I'm in a very rural part of Boring, which is actually unincorporated Boring. They had private land and they wanted her to lay her to rest there where they lived. And I just wasn't quite sure how we can make that happen. So I was very transparent with them. And I said, okay, I've always worked for either a corporation or for the Catholic Church. And even though I've been in funeral homes and cemeteries, and that's what my career has been, I've never done this before. And I want to figure this out with you. So we just sort of held each other's hand and made it happen, which was pretty fantastic. And guess what? It was really super easy. So the very next morning, we just went ahead and we had this wonderful ceremony. A backhoe arrived, it dug the space, and by the afternoon, we were having this amazing burial ceremony. And it's the way Wanda the Wanderer would have wanted it. And the reason why I call her Wanda the Wanderer is when we were filling out the vital statistics for the death certificate, we had to choose a job title and an industry. And so they said, well, she's a wanderer. And they wanted that to be her occupation and the earth to be the industry. And I thought that was great. But I said, you know what, Clackamas County Vital Records, they're going to kick that back to me. So we probably have to do something else. But nonetheless, they were just so gentle and kind, and I enjoyed them greatly. So this service was nothing like I had been to before. The family played drums and we chanted and we spoke of her kindness and we held hands and talked about how wonderful Wanda is. And her three sons, they lowered her into the ground, and she was just cloaked, everything about this was just so beautiful and so tender and so gentle. And this little tiny knoll of dirt was on top of the grave to compensate for any settling that might happen over time. And there was just no marker but native foliage. And we had a closing prayer, and we feasted on fish that her sons caught right down the street of the Clackamas River. And it was absolutely fabulous. So as I drove home that day, it really all clicked for me. That idea that the deeper meaning as to why I was called into the death care industry sort of revealed itself to me. When I was a kid, I grew up in Tigard, and I had my mother and my father's parents. We all kind of shared a family home. All three of them died in a very short period of time. And I went to a little Catholic school, little St. Anthony's, and the priest was always at our house, or the Fournier name was always being announced. And there was always a rosary and prayers and mass and hospital visits and funerals and all these things. And it just kind of became my thing. And kids would sit next to me if they wanted to talk about maybe, grandpa was sick in the hospital, or maybe the dog died or something. And I became this only person that these kids really knew or could relate to that had somebody die, because my life was a little bit different. So I always thought that the reason why I came into the death industry, because I knew at 13 I wanted to be in the death arts. I wasn't quite sure what that looked like, but nonetheless, it turned out that this time as I was driving home, I thought, you know what? It was that watershed moment that said, green burial makes this amazing sense, this idea that we come from nature and nature is where we return. And this experience I had with Wanda and her friends, it truly just changed me. And the reality is, these tribe of these friends, they still drop vegetables off at the funeral home here 16 years later. They still stop in and say hello. So it was a magical thing for them too, equally reciprocated, and really happy about that. So as I did more research and all, I realized, hey, guess what? This isn't anything brand new. This is what we did up until about 150 years ago. So I want to give you some history of burial, so you have kind of understand how we went from people burying each other in their yards to all what we do. And now we're kind of coming back full fold to the idea of green burial. So home funerals and home burial, this is really practiced everywhere. And each community had a group of women who came in, and they would help with the laying out of the dead. So just up until the Civil War, really, women, they were primarily responsible for the preparation of the bodies for burial. They'd wash, they'd dress, they'd groom, and the men would come and they would dig the graves or possibly make the caskets. And this whole process from start to finish, it was really intimate. It brought the family and the community together, and it was something that was important, and we really cherished and revered our loved ones. And in the front parlor of these large homes, this is where the visitation would be. There would be the loved one laid out. People would come and take their time, and they'd make meals and cook, and somebody could come down the stairs and see peepaw if they felt like it in the middle of the night. And then when they kind of realized, okay, now they're ready to move on, they would have the loved one come out the side door, get them into one of these coaches, and it would be either a wagon, horse-drawn carriage, buggy, what have you, and then they'd proceed on to the church or to the cemetery. And this is really just sort of what we did. So the Civil War is what really changed everything. And the reason why is there were so many boys that died, and families wanted these young men back home for burial. They wanted them to come back. And it was really tricky with the body to get it on a train. It was very problematic. There wasn't really any sort of refrigeration that could happen. So there was some doctors out in the battlefield who came up with this really interesting slow decomposition idea. And it's really what the first embalming was. It was this elixir of this arsenic and this mercury and this soap and this water, and it allowed the bodies to just kind of stay together enough to be able to get back to the family's home, to be laid out in the front parlor, and then go on to the graveyard. And that's what we did. So what made a huge significant dent here in the industry is back in 1865, our beloved President Lincoln was assassinated. And he was the very first US president to be embalmed. So he was placed on this train, and this train traveled over 1,600 miles, and it went through 180 different cities and 7 different states. And people got to see President Lincoln. They got to see this beloved man. They had to see him. They loved him. They had to walk past him. And this had never been done before. So he laid in state in many different places. And I love this photo because you look over to the far left, that's his coach. That's what we say in the industry, but his hearse. He would be from the train lowered into this hearse, and then in a caisson procession brought into wherever he was going to stay. But look at all these people. Just absorb this photograph. There's people hanging out the windows of the building. People are just all over the place. You can't even get down the street. I mean, that's pretty darn magnificent. So because of all these people wanting to come and pay their final respects, there was extended publicity. And because of that, embalming really took center stage, and the death care industry as we know it today truly was born. I wanted to show you this so you can see that there are about, oh gosh, I'd say 54% of Americans today are considering natural burial. Okay, so we had the idea, we were embalmed, we would have tombstones, we would show our loved one with the big caskets, we would do all this stuff. We ended up having no longer home funerals, we would have funeral homes, you'd whisk your loved one away. But now we're realizing, especially places like Oregon, that there's more that we can do. There's more choices. And so if you take a look at all these cemeteries here in Oregon and Washington, all of these cemeteries allow natural burial. And I just wanted to throw this one out real quick so you can see it, because I think people will hear me talk about green burial and say, yeah, well, I can't do this in my backyard. So this doesn't, oh yeah, that's a great story, but that doesn't relate to me because I can't do this in my yard, or I don't live in rural Clackamas County. But check out these names. There's a couple in Eugene and Ashland and Estacada and Portland. And you look, there's several in Portland if you take a peek at that. And we go up to, you know, Spokane and Bainbridge Island and these places, Redmond, Washington. These are pretty populated places, and all of these places will allow a body to be buried in a grave without a concrete liner or cement in the bottom of the grave. They will allow what we call natural burial. So when families say to me, okay, I like this idea, but what do I do? What I tell them is, let's start backwards. So pick a place, figure out if you're in the Pacific Northwest, do you like one of these cemeteries? Will this work for you? If not, do you want to do this in your yard? That's another choice. So let's go through some of these choices so you can see a little bit what these look like. So this is Riverview Cemetery in Portland, just in the Southwest, off Macadam, across the Selwood Bridge. And this is a cemetery where you see the very large tombstones that say Weinhardt and different bridges in town. These are where a lot of famous Portlandians live, and live because this is where their bodies are for the rest of eternity here. This was a natural burial I took care of. The person is wrapped up in fabric. This family really loved Hawaii. So he's wrapped in fabric and he's lowered into a grave. His body will directly touch the earth. They all broke out their best Jimmy Buffett Hawaiian clothes, and the woman in the front right in the yellow and the black sarong did a lovely dance. And it's a really wonderful way for them to celebrate the day and to celebrate their love for this person and do it in a natural style. And they did it in a cemetery that people would think, oh my gosh, I don't think I could do it there. But yes, you can. They will allow natural burial at most graves throughout the park, which is pretty fantastic. You're not just kind of segregated to one area. Most graves they will allow to be green if that's something you want to do. This is the Green Garden, and this is the natural burial ground in historic Columbian Cemetery. This cemetery is in North Portland off North Columbia Boulevard. And if you are going I-5 north and you come to where Columbia Boulevard is, over to the right, there's a strip of 7 acres right below the highway. And people have often said, well, why do they put a cemetery underneath the freeway? Well, You got to guess the cemetery's been here since 1857. The cemetery is probably there first, then the freeway showed up. But this is a cemetery where the whole back portion is dedicated to natural burial. And this is something where, again, these are hand dug graves. Your loved one can be placed into the ground, and there'll be a boulder that was cored from the earth there that can be sandblasted and can have the person's name on. So that's right there. That's in North Portland in the industrial part of town. So this doesn't have to be in the middle of nowhere. It can be in Multnomah County. Pretty fantastic. This is Herland Forest, and this is 80 miles from downtown Portland and Waukeikis, Washington, in Klickitat County, right above the Klickitat River area. And this is a natural burial preserve. And this is a place where there aren't any headstones. There isn't any standard graves where they've allowed green burial. This is made just for natural burial. And so this is more of a meadow field, just to kind of give you an idea. So if you have an interest in some of these burial grounds, I highly suggest that you go to my website, cornerstonefuneral.com, take a look at all the names and all the places and take a peek at them and look at the pictures and see what's out there and see what feels right to you. Some are in the heart of the city, some are in the middle of nowhere, like this one. And this is really fantastic. I mean, look at that grave space. This is all done, that's pine cones that spell out the word love. And those are some boughs from the tree branches. And those are some rocks, some brought from the family, some acquired there in the forest. And how lovely is that? And that isn't just going to stay there until they mow the next day. That's going to stay there until its nature calls for it not to be there anymore. So that is pretty fantastic. So another choice of burial is backyard burial. And that encompasses burying a person on residential property, land that is privately owned. So it's truly someone's backyard. People just don't tend to buy acres and say, hey, we'll go ahead and create our own cemetery, because then you have a cemetery, then it needs to get licensed, all of those things. This is merely someone's backyard. And laws really vary, not only state by state, but really county by county. Like I said before, in Oregon, there's many counties that do allow natural burial. Multnomah County has cemeteries that allow it, but these are actual cemeteries of authority that are cemeteries built specifically for this purpose of laying people to rest. They won't allow this in private property. In rural Clackamas County, they say, sure, that's fine. I always tell people, if you're interested, call your local zoning and planning board and ask, run your address by them, see what they say, because again, you want to make sure you are in your correct standings there. And this is something fun to share with you, but you know, there's only 5 states that say bodies must be buried in an established cemetery. So the 5 states that don't have any room for private land would be Arkansas, California, Indiana, Louisiana, and Washington. And people are always surprised because Washington is so huge, and they say, oh my gosh, there's a lot of greenery there, a lot of green space. Why can't we have it there? And well, there's some, you know, there's some little wiggle room there, such as you're welcome to have a private land burial on an island if you own your own island, you know, but that's not so ostentatious because there's thousands of islands, tiny little places of land surrounded by water. So there's, you know, some give and take, but really those 5 states say, please do this in an established cemetery. So Oregon law, sort of how it works is they want you to make sure the property owner can give consent. They will agree to maintain records for the body or the body is buried on the property. And it's important to disclose if the property is sold. So what I tell families to do is draw a map of your yard, your property, whatever it is, and place a little indication on the space, a little heart, a little shamrock, a little something or other. I don't think you have to do an X. That's just too dramatic, I think. But put some sort of something so we know where grandma is, because grandma might be in the blackberry bushes out yonder. But what if all of a sudden one day there aren't blackberry bushes? Then we're sort of stuck. Or what if there's only one person still occupying the house, or one person in the family, that person passes away? Then we don't really know. We just sort of know, well, someplace something's happening. We do need to know. That is the right that the new landowners should have. They should really get to know where somebody is on their property. And there are people who will buy property. It's not off the books or off the table. It might dissuade some people, so you have to keep that in mind. But nonetheless, well, we've set the correct vibration and the correct person will come along. So Oregon home burials, the environmental standards are very important. The private burial needs to be 150 feet away from a water supply or a tributary or a creek. We like to be 100 feet away from a drilled well. If there's power line anywhere, let's be the space for the burial. Let's try to get 25 feet at least back from that. And then also, if you have some acreage, at least 1 acre you need, but most people do this if they have more, try to be 20 feet back from the setback on the property. I think that's a very important thing as well. Again, make this someplace where it's private, it's nice for you to visit, maybe not right by the road. And then if you do sell the property, you just have to commit your loved one to the earth to be a tree, because you don't really have rights to come bring flowers to mom on Mother's Day unless you actually work that out with the new owner. I mean, that's their property. They kind of can do what they want to do. So transporting a loved one is legal. We can put somebody into a vehicle, and we use this, again, respectfully. If you notice here, we have a wooden tray to bring the person in and out of the vehicle. Just somebody wrapped in sort of a blanket is a bit of a floppy package and hard to do. So we need to be able to be ethical, be respectful, and also just be practical. So this tray has some straps. You'll see the little metal disc there on the front left. That is an Oregon state tag, and that has 6 digits on it. And that's actually something everybody who dies in the state of Oregon does have one of those tags. Those 6 numbers are typed onto the death certificate. When you have cremains, those numbers are with that. If you have a casket, it's taped to it. We just sort of work it all together so that disc follows the person throughout the process and is charted on all the paperwork. And Oregon has a fantastic reputation of not burying the wrong person, not cremating the wrong person. Oregon is stellar for not handing back the wrong ashes. People are really chart things, take their time. Everything has a law with it, and everything is pretty well done. I must say, I've done this job for 31 years, and I'm very proud of my local peoples. I think they do really good. All right, so this is another family who decided to ramp it up there. They have a truck and they put that on top, which I thought was super cute. You can see the little driver there over to the left. Look, he's peeking. He's like, she's taking a picture of my coach. But he wanted to have they had a little chapel service at my funeral home. And then they wanted to bring the loved one themselves to the cemetery. And that is legal. You can drive your loved one to the funeral home, to the cemetery, to the church, to the crematory. In Oregon, you can transport your loved one. You can actually transport your loved one across state lines. You can do these things, which is fantastic. States all have different rules. And there's a wonderful website called it's called National Home Funeral. It's National Home Funerals, and they break it down for you as far as going all the way through the United States. There's a wonderful website called OregonFunerals.org that a fantastic local woman named Holly Pruitt put together, and that has all the rules for refrigeration and cooling and different things in the state of Oregon. So that's extreme. That's a labor of love for her. That was really extensive and really fantastic. She could put that together and make that happen. Okay, so again, the simple truck here, he has a canopy. It's not an open truck. We try to make things as ethical and legal. That's a really important words here. I like to help families get whatever they want and do what they want, but ethical and legal, extremely important. So this is what biodegradable caskets look like. You might not have seen these before. Cardboard is biodegradable. Wool, wicker, these are caskets that most cemeteries say these are fine. Even if it's a cemetery that doesn't allow natural burial, you still can have your person inside, not embalmed, inside a natural container, and then put them inside the steel or the metal, that specific, the concrete that certain cemeteries have. Cemeteries have the right to choose what their rules are. And so that some cemeteries say, sorry, you're going to have a grave liner. Others say, we don't really care, as long as you can get your loved one from the vehicle to the lowering device, fine with us. These are some other options. There's newspaper over there. And this is another shroud. Linen is biodegradable. Silk is biodegradable. And look, there's just a basic pine casket over there. And even though it's wood, the craftsmanship for the natural pine caskets are dowels, non-toxic glue. We might use something to core some holes. For instance, there's some rope that serves as the handles. But again, even if there's a hole poured in, then there's a dowel inside that's used in place to go ahead and bear the weight and close everything up on the container. So this family, this guy was so darling. Little guy went to go visit him at his house. And he said, young lady, come out to my garage. And he showed me that he had these wonderful canvas sacks. Actually not canvas, they're burlap, these burlap bags. And he said, I've had these for years and I want you to wrap me in these and this will be my shroud. And I want you to bury me. So here he is with his natural burial and his burlap sacks. And I was so tickled that he actually got what he wanted. And interestingly enough, his children weren't so keen on this idea. They thought, I don't know if this is respectful. I don't know. I feel kind of embarrassed and strange, but this is what he wanted. So again, make your wishes known. Tell the person who will be in charge of your disposition what you want. And if you feel like somebody isn't going to carry it out for you in your family, have somebody else do it to carry it out. One way to get what you want is if you actually go in and prearrange with a funeral parlor, and if you sign everything and if you pay for everything, then your next of kin cannot change your form of disposition and they cannot change the container that you chose. So that's one way to sort of safeguard what you want. But hopefully, if there isn't a family member who can carry it out for you, you will have a loved one in your life who will, because this is really important to him to make this happen. And I'm glad I could, but it had to do with the health of his family letting me in the garage to get this and make it happen too. So this is a gentleman who is making his own casket. This is something that's happening. There's kits that you can put together. You can buy them online. There's carpenters who can do things. But again, several ways if you want to build your own casket. Funeral homes have to accept what you bring in for burial. You can buy something online, do what you want. Two things to think about. Whatever it is needs to have handles. You notice the bottom one doesn't have handles, so there's some straps. You have to be able to carry it. You have to be able to move it from the vehicle to the burial space. Really hard to do without any sort of handles on there. And then the casket dimensions have to fit into the grave. Very important that your casket can fit into your burial space. Something very important. Logistics, but very, very, very important. When families bring caskets to me, this is an empty casket and families will bring me their caskets. And this is kind of what it looks like. Here's a truck and it's just sort of strapped in and it's got some cushions and here it is. And I love showing this picture. This person was so daring and so lovely. And I kind of blurred the license plate just out of respect for them. But they were so proud of this. They brought the casket for their loved one on their car, and not the safest option. They don't have much view out of the back. And yes, it probably got too many eyes on it while it was driving down the road, because people probably go back to that movie Vacation where grandma was, on the top of the car. So I think that this probably garners too much attention. This has probably been on everybody's Instagram feed, I guess, if they saw it going down the road. So maybe something a little bit more modest would be a better way to deliver this to the funeral home, but it worked. I see a lot of Subarus. People will just put the back seats down and put things in, or in a van. That all works fine. That's all great. So I was able to be at the very first natural organic reduction, which happened in the United States. And this was last December. And there is a new thing you probably have heard of called composting, human composting, or natural organic reduction is what it's called. It is legal in the state of Washington, the state of Colorado, and the state of Oregon. And it was up for, it was running in California. It didn't pass though, but sometimes these things like the aqua cremation and all this take a little while to go through. But nonetheless, there are no facilities up and running in Oregon or in Colorado, but there are 3 in Washington. There is one in north of Seattle, and it is called Return Home. There's one south of Seattle called Recompose, and this one is at Herland Forest that I showed you that picture before. This is outside in the forest. The man in the bottom right, his name is Walt Patrick. He's a steward of that forest, and this is what that looks like. We have, if you look at the top, that container there has many gallons of just natural chips. We're looking at just a natural mix of bacteria and protozoa and fungi and earth matter. It's a bunch of chips from wood. The half of the container, that cradle you'd call it, it has those laid down. The loved one is placed in. The rest of the chips are on top. So the second picture there has a loved one there. There is a large temperature gauge inside, looking at the temperature. The bottom one, him and I are placing the lid on top and getting it in place and locking it in place. And if you notice, this is sort of a soft rotating method where it's just a matter of rocking back and forth gently. And ultimately, to be able to have that carbon to nitrogen ratio and have the decomposition happen naturally. The key requirement is for the natural organic reduction is the remains have to reach a temperature of 131 degrees Fahrenheit and hold that for at least 3 days. So there is a science behind it. There is a let's watch and see process. And this is legal in 3 states, and there's 3 places up and running in Washington. So something to check out if you have an interest as well. Another legal green form of disposition in the state of Oregon is burial at sea. And this is a burial that's going to sink all the way down to the floor of the ocean. It's going to decompose naturally. And this is very green because there's no embalming. There isn't a container with steel or concrete or other non-biodegradable materials. This is all kind of done under federal guise because it's in the ocean ways. And the boat captain needs to go 3 miles off the coast of the ocean for a depth of about 600 feet. And off it goes, and families come, and sometimes there's flowers and drinks and toasts and songs or whatever. And it's really quite a lovely way to spend a day. This is aqua dissolution. This is what they call biocremation or water cremation. This is something, alkaline hydrolysis. This is something that is legal in about 18 states. This is something that's been in Oregon for about 6 years, and it's really using water to bring the body back to a natural state. So rather than the high heat of the flame cremation, we are using the flameless cremation, and it's environmentally friendly. It accelerates the natural decomposition process. It breaks down the remains, and ultimately you get ashes. That's what you get. You get a box of ashes. You get cremains to bury, to scatter, to take home, to do whatever you want to do. This process here, it uses water, it uses some alkalinity, and it has fossil fuels that don't release any harmful gases or chemicals, and it doesn't contribute to any pollution. So it's pretty fabulous. And I love this picture because the attendant behind the machine is standing gracefully there in his black suit. And it's kind of, I don't know, it's respectful and wonderful that I don't know, something about not being able to see his face there. Just very, very, I don't know. I love that picture. Let's put it that way. I love it. So to give you a little wrap up here before we get to questions, this green burial, it's reaching across the country. And because it's really right there in the name, people really consider themselves green. I think people that strive to recycle and they reuse and they make wise choices, they do it while they're alive. They want to recycle their cans, and they want to bring their cloth bags to the store. And they're finding that if I can do this in my life, why not go ahead and do this in my death? And when people find out that natural burial is really part of the zeitgeist, and it's legal in all 50 states, and you can even do it in your yard in some places, people get more excited as time goes on. This is a nice picture. That's really nice. Just 2 family members kind of standing and viewing and reminiscing and taking their time. If green burial isn't quite where your family is or where you are, why not consider greening the experience? That's something I think very important. Maybe consider carpooling or using plants rather than cut flowers. Have people bring succulents that hardly take any water, and then families can bring them home with them. Remember their loved one and have them. You can use recycled paper for memorial folders. You can use sustainable farm food for your morning meals. You can do a lot of really neat things, and you can make things green as possible, even if it's going to be something which it looks more traditional and more standard. So this is just a couple more parting examples of how lovely this is. Really sweet. I just really enjoy the feeling of people gathering and being able to take their time and sort of luxuriate through the experience and be and all. So this is my book that Cheryl spoke of, Green Burial Guidebook. You can check it out from the Westland Library. You can buy it used, so you don't have to tear down a tree. Buy it used, buy it electronically, borrow it from a friend. Also, if you have questions at any point that don't get answered today, call me at the parlor. I wrote that book. That's why I'm here, to answer questions and all. And don't be shy. You can follow me on Instagram. I'm at Elizabeth Green Reaper, and it kind of gives you like the day by day sort of behind the scenes of what an eco-friendly mortician looks like. And then I also have 2 groups as well. I have a Green Burial Portland group and a Green Burial Portland page on Facebook. So I'm going to stop sharing. There we go. All right.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Everyone, if you have questions, go ahead and put those in the chat. I see one there already. And I had a question, Elizabeth. What happens if a property owner, they bought a property, knew that the previous property owner had buried a body there and they were okay with it. Then later they changed their mind and want that body removed? Do they have the right to pursue that, or are they stuck? Like, what happens in that situation?
So just like a body at a cemetery, there is a chain of command that we need to do. First off, you need to contact a funeral home. You need to have somebody take care of the exhuming. We need paperwork. We need a permit to make this happen. So if you don't know the family prior, then you could call your local funeral home and step in and go from there, but they'll want the county involved and all that. Sometimes families say, gosh, I don't want to be the bad guy and I don't want to exhume somebody, because then they have to do that. Then they have to actually put them into a cemetery. You have to actually put them someplace. We can't just go ahead and this isn't compost at this point. It's still a loved one. It's still human remains. From there, some people just decide to pour a concrete slab and put down a shop or do something else. So you can, I guess, do that way, or grow a bush or do something else to disguise. And that's why sometimes these old properties, you'll see there's a bunch of blackberry bushes, and a couple of them in Oregon City have been found. And there's a little tiny grave way in the back, and they just let the blackberries grow and grow and grow. So the grave wasn't really feasible. And that's just sort of how they dealt with it.
All right, next question. How does the cost of aqua cremation compare to traditional cremation?
Aqua cremation is a little bit more, and the reason why is because there is very few machines. Every funeral home does not have their aqua cremation machine, just like every funeral home doesn't have a crematory. There are more flame crematories than there are aqua. So it's sort of the supply and demand. So it's going to be a little bit more. It depends on what the funeral home decides for pricing it. I can just give you an example from my parlor, just to make you see the understanding there of what that is. The simple flame basic cremation with everything included is $595. If you're going to use the aqua with everything included, then it jumps up to $1195. So you do see there's a little bit more pricing, because I have to go by what they're charging me, because there's one machine.
Do you find that someone's green burial is often pre-planned, or do family make their green burial decisions when there is a need?
So that's a fantastic question. I can answer it as, if you think this is something you're interested in, start backwards, figure out where you want to be buried. And you don't necessarily have to buy a space, but figure that out. And then what do you want to be buried in? Do you want to be in a burlap bag or a wicker casket, or do you want someone to make something? And then write these things down. If you're not actually going to buy these things and make all this in an official plan, make sure these wishes are known and you write them down, and bright colored notebook, whatever. So that way you're taken care of. I would say half the people say to me, oh yeah, Fred always talked about that, but yeah, how do we do that? Or other people will just say, I saw an article you wrote and I guess this is what we want for our grandma. How do we do it? The other half of the people come to me and they have it all suited up and say, okay, I need to be able to share with my family what this is going to look like and what the chain of command is going to look like. And I don't want my family to have to worry about this. It's really 50-50. And also it's all different ages, ethnicities, socioeconomic, neighborhoods. It's all different individuals. It's pretty amazing.
Next question. Not to be indelicate, but is there an odor from the deceased? How much time can elapse between death and green burial?
Okay, so great question. So there is no state rule that says burial has to happen within a certain amount of days. There is not a rule that says that. The one rule you might find out, if let's say someone passes in your house and you're under hospice care, they might say you need to have the body go to a funeral home within 24 hours. And that's sort of how the state rule is written in Oregon. It says within 24 hours, somebody needs to be buried, cremated, embalmed, refrigerated. That just needs to happen. So families are realizing, a body can be out of refrigeration, not embalmed, not buried more than 24 hours. I'm going to say that depends on the situation. Is it 100 degrees out? Is the person very large in stature? Were they found? Some of those things matter. But if it's just a perfect situation that somebody dies at hospice, they've been bathed regularly. People have been checking in on them. They're fine. People can last for quite a while. That's really no issue. So it's hard to put a time on it. I guess without odor. I mean, sometimes someone releases bowels, so that's maybe the odor you would find within a day or two. Maybe that wouldn't happen, but for the most part, no. People will have a loved one pass away, and then a couple hours later, they'll have some ladies from the church come over and they'll bathe her, and they'll say, well, what do we need to do? Do we need protective gowns and all this stuff? And I'll say, talk to Mabel and bathe Mabel just like you would while she's alive, because again, it's not, there isn't a huge situation that happens once someone passes away.
Does someone have to involve a funeral service, or can they just bury a loved one themselves?
Wonderful question. In the state of Oregon, in the state of Washington, many states, actually, there are several states, 41 of them to be exact, that say you can act as your own funeral director. And what that means is you can't willy-nilly have somebody die in your house. You can't prepare a space and just put them in it. There's a couple more steps there. You have to have a death certificate that you will come up with, the piece of paper. You will go ahead and get the medical provider to sign off on it. You'll need to file that in the county where the death happened, and then you can go ahead and bury in your property. So you do not have to hire a funeral home. You can take care of your own cooling. You can use ice, you can use air conditioning. There's many ways that you can get away with not doing some of these steps that the funeral directors do. You can bathe somebody yourself, dress them yourself, shroud them yourself, all of that. So there is a lot of that information on my website. Also, if you go to OregonFunerals.org, all that's written out too, of how to take self-care, take back your rights, and you don't have to hire a funeral home whatsoever. You can provide your transportation. You can do all of that yourself. One thing I do suggest is have a team of people, because after you've been sitting by a bed during hospice, nurturing somebody, or even if it's not hospice, sometimes you're tired. You spend a lot of time while this person has passed. Now it's happened. You might need some sleep. It's really hard to type out that death certificate and go sit at the waiting room for 6 hours for a doctor to sign. Sometimes you need people to kind of step in and help do things. So if this is your plan, get it in place, learn about it. That's the easiest way. People have done this all of a sudden. I do get phone calls that people say it's an unexpected death. Medical examiners release them. They're at our house, or they are wherever they are, and we want to do this. And it can happen. It's just more stress on the family. So always try to put some of your ducks in a row.
What happens if someone dies on the East Coast, for example, and wants a green burial in Oregon?
So we just had a situation where there was someone who passed away in Maryland, and they wanted a natural organic reduction in the state of Washington. And this is something I don't think everybody are aware of. Somebody can get on the airplane, and there's many airlines that do not need embalming. So you can get on Delta, you can get on Southwest. There's a lot of airlines that say, fine, we can go ahead, and the funeral home there can get the person in the air tray with the legal paperwork. We can get them with some gel packs for cooling. We can get them into the plane. The funeral home on the other end, or the family, or whomever, if it's a state where you can have self-guided care, can go ahead and pick up the loved one and drive them to the cemetery, or do whatever they need to do. So that happens all the time, especially with natural burial, and especially with the natural organic reduction, because you're limited in the places you can do that. There's cemeteries all over all the 50 states, but not every state has a lot of the natural burial places. And so I'm finding that more people say, no, I really want to be here. This is what I want to do. How do I do this? And just like that, it can all be done easier than you think.
I did not know someone didn't necessarily need a funeral director. How does a person not in the industry get the purple paper for the doctor to sign the death certificate?
So there's two things you can do. One is you can either call the Oregon State Mortuary Board and say you're going to act as your own provider and you need the kit. And they give you a kit where there's the 6-digit metal disc. There is some list of what to do. And there is that actual death certificate form. It's not the purple paper, but it's a form you can fill out. What I tell families a lot of times is, if you want to do this yourselves, let me take the paperwork process off your hands. It'll make it so much easier. I have a computer. I can type in on my electronic death certificate system where it's just the thumbprint. That way Social Security is notified right away. That way you don't have to figure out how to fill everything out correctly. You don't have to chase down the doctor. You don't have to do this stuff. Because a lot of times why someone doesn't want a funeral director is not necessarily to save money, but they want to help their loved one. They want to do it organically or naturally, or they want to be in charge of everything. And I think people don't find a lot of pleasure in running a death certificate around town. That's going to be your least, I guess, helpful thing. If you can bathe your loved one, or if you can prepare their space, or if you can provide their transportation, then you're helping your loved one more. So if I can do that part, that helps families quite a bit. So it's up to you. You're welcome to get your black ink or your typewriter and do it, but not everybody has a typewriter. So, and then the county's really tricky on how you fill things out. So if you mess something up, you can't use whiteout, you sort of have to start again. So that's where it's like, you can at least maybe, if you want to take that burden off you, just my professional suggestion, if you want to ask a funeral home to just kind of get the paperwork, and they probably could do it quicker too.
Okay, that is all the questions I see. So thank you everybody for coming tonight. Thank you, Elizabeth. This was a very
Welcome.
great and informative presentation.
Mhm.
I learned a lot. I'm sure everybody else did as well. Do you have any parting words?
Yes. So if you come up with anything else, you can email me, Elizabeth@cornerstonefuneral.com. I'm in the phone book, you can call. And I think that sometimes people will listen to this and months later, a friend of a friend might be talking about a natural burial, and they might say, oh, I have this question, I don't know what to do. Even if you're not using my funeral home, even if you're doing this yourself, you still can use me as your resource, and you still can call and ask the questions. Because again, I think it's just, I got the knowledge, why not use it?
Great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I really
You're
appreciate it.
welcome. Enjoy your evening all.
Everyone have a great evening.
Bye.
Bye.